during hailstorms.
And Cheryl, in terms of contracting and the vendors, of the folks who are supplying those kinds of backup power systems, et cetera, is that just done through the normal utility sort of procurement system that you have, or how do you contract with?
You're speaking to diesel fuel and things like that?
Right, in terms of some of the emergency power supplies.
Yeah, in terms of the emergency power supplies, certainly we have our own power plants, and we've been very fortunate during our emergencies. It's not been the power supplies themselves that are the problem, it's the lines. So the on-site diesel storage, we keep a reserve of several days on hand. We also have pre-existing contracts for the delivery of that. We also do reserve generators through contractors to make sure that, should the outage be longer than typical and we've got to deploy, whether that's to city facilities, our own facilities, some additional generators, we have those on a standby contract. So they're not standing by for us all the time, but we've got a contract to call upon, and they will procure what they need. We're fortunate in a big area. Not all of our region will be hit at one time.
Is there state assistance available for emergency backup procurement? Any programs through the state of Texas through emergency preparedness?
I think the state offices and the state organization does. Obviously, they respond to regional issues here in the state through the governor in their own emergency planning sections. We've not had to call upon those. We do kind of provide and determine to be self-sufficient in that area.
So Shanti, let me bring you back into the discussion and ask you, if you would, to tell us the story of Greensburg, Kansas.
Sure. So a little background here. About 3 years ago, in May of 2007, a EF5 tornado hit Kansas, Greensburg, Kansas. It's a small farming community, very typical town in Kansas that got hit by a 205-mile-an-hour tornado. And 95% of all the residences and homes were destroyed. And so there was a few buildings that did survive. They were the ones that were built over 100 years ago of concrete and significant structures. But there was two buildings that survived that were 17-inch concrete walls and built 100 years ago with substantial building materials. But so Greensburg then decided, how are we going to rebuild? Are we going to rebuild? There was that discussion. If it was a dying southwestern farming town and all those towns are having a lot of problems keeping people in town. You graduate high school and you typically never come back, right? And that's a very common story in the Midwest. And so they felt that they needed to rebuild green, rebuild with renewable energy to have a reason for people to come back or to come to Greensburg, Kansas. And so
it's an interesting perspective, since it seems almost uncommon. It would be fairly easy, I would think, and fairly straightforward to just go in and rebuild exactly the way it was, rather than have this green component. What was some of the thinking behind that? What led to that?
Initially, the first couple of days after the tornado, when FEMA was involved and all the USDA was heavily involved in rebuilding, and the discussion happened: how quickly can we rebuild? That was the first. That was the first discussion that happened. They wanted to rebuild as quick as possible, and so. However, they also wanted to rebuild right, and they also wanted. They felt they had an opportunity to rebuild with a purpose and to have an economic development engine around rebuilding green. And so they've really they took a step back and said, well, hold on, let's try and do this right. And so they spent some time doing a great master plan. They developed a whole community master plan about rebuilding green, rebuilding sustainable, rebuilding with a connection back to the rural farming community, water efficiency, energy efficiency, doing things right and simple as a big connection to the people in western Kansas. And so they were able to put together a community master plan that included all those goals, and that really got them started down the path of their long-term goal was to be powered 100% renewable 100% of the time, and so that was 2 years ago. And so DOE and NREL have been providing technical assistance in all the renewable projects that they've been looking at, as well as the rebuilding energy efficiency, green, LEED, and such. And, it's a small town, and DOE and NREL can't support every single small town rebuilding, so we've been trying to use this as an example of what can be done for other disaster recovery efforts throughout the country, for the most part, and really trying to get the word out of what Greensburg has done and how others can do it.
About some of the lessons that you've learned so far in some of the recovery that you've been involved with. What are some of the key lessons learned from Greensburg?
I always like to say, if it can be done in southwestern rural Kansas, it can be done anywhere, right? I mean, it's pretty difficult to really get into a community that's trying to rebuild, that has that mission of rebuilding as fast as possible. And so to do it right, they've never necessarily done anything like this before. And so they went from 0 miles an hour to 60 in the green building movement, overnight. And so they've really, it took them a while to get up to speed, but if they keep it simple and they really do things that they can understand in terms of why they're doing it, and kind of having the community message around rebuilding green, having the economic development behind wind and energy efficiency and sustainable agriculture, that they can have an economic engine to bring people back and to have businesses developed around those concepts. And so by tying it to economic development, they've really been able to make it succeed. They've got a lot of media attention. They've been really successful at getting the word out of what Greensburg is doing. The Discovery Channel has been filming a reality show about rebuilding green for the last 3 years on Planet Green, for those that have been following that. And so that's been documenting the personal side of rebuilding, but also rebuilding green. And so they were heavily pushing that, and they got used to cameras in everyone's meetings and everyone's recovery meetings over the last 3 years. And so it's attracted investments and donations, and really kept the media spotlight on what they're doing, because they were able to commit to these stretch goals. And so a little background on what they have committed to, and that they are currently on track to reach, is 100% renewable. And so they're going to meet that goal. The city set when they're rebuilding, the city set a requirement that all city buildings had to be LEED Platinum. The only city ordinance requiring LEED Platinum in the country, I believe. And so the city set the stage for, including Austin, yeah. Right, and so, I mean, it's a small town. It's not like they have a lot of big city buildings, but it set the stage for, the city's committed to it. We think there's economic development around it. We think it's the right thing to do. We have the opportunity to rebuild. Let's go for these stretch goals. Let's get the national media attention on Greensburg for 2-3 years plus about rebuilding green, what we're doing to bring that economic development strategy into town.
I'd be curious as to, sorry, David, the success that you've had with the green building model and the 100% renewable. Have these facilities and customers on average, how could you describe it all, how they differ from the average town in terms of their energy consumption?
Yeah, so it's a small town. It's a typical town with a school, a large K-12 school for the county. It's got a small critical access hospital. So that's the next biggest building in town. There's a John Deere dealership. That's the biggest employer in town is the dealership. All will be LEED Platinum and exceeding 50% energy savings. And so my involvement in town was really working with each of those owners, really understanding what it takes to get significant energy savings, but in a cost-effective way. And the key strategy there is really to talk to the owners about investments in things that have good integrated design concepts, envelope, daylighting, things that don't have to cost any more if you consider them early on as part of what what the goals are for the project. And so all those projects have been very successful at incorporating all these energy efficiency strategies to get to a 50% savings or greater. And then combining that with the renewables that are available. This is a Class 3, Class 4 wind in western Kansas. It's a utility scale wind there, and so the big building projects all have 50 kW wind turbines associated with them, and that are part of the LEED project. A lot of, but also contribute to those savings.
I want to ask a question of Cheryl, and then I want to open it up to questions from the audience if anyone has a question. So let me just pose this, and then you can cogitate on what it is that you'd like to ask our panel members. But Cheryl, I'm wondering what sorts of advice or what kinds of guidance would you give suppliers of renewable systems and professionals who are interested in